everybody. This is Gregory with 5-Minute Catholic Apologetics, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today we're going to retort to the idea that it's okay to have different types of services / liturgy. Now, before we begin, let's start with a prayer. Nomine Patri et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri et Filii et Spiritui Sancto. Secutor in principio et nunc et semper et saecula saeculorum. Amen. All right, so there are people, and clearly there's a lot of denominations that believe it's okay to have whatever service you feel like you should have to stir the spirit, to get the burning of the bosom. And this is just not true. If you look at liturgy or service, it's always been top down. It's always been top down. It's never been kind of just grassroots, let's make up a service or liturgy that suits us. Now, for the recent centuries, certainly you can see that in Protestant denominations and 10 house revivals and stuff like that. But if you go back to the early church, you can see this even demonstrated in the Old Testament. Like if you look at the Levitical law, right? The offering of sacrifice, which remember the Mass is a sacrifice. Back then, of course, they would sacrifice animals. There was a rubric, so to speak. There was a criteria. There was a top-down approach on this is how we worship our God. And when it came to the New Testament, of course, we didn't have to sacrifice animals anymore. But even so, in the early church, you can see this played out in 1 Corinthians, where Paul does talk about receiving the Eucharist. God, in the form of Jesus Christ, gave us a deposit of faith. He gave us a visible church founded on Peter and the apostles, on how he wanted things to go after he was gone. And part of that is that, yes, he wanted us to celebrate on the day of his resurrection on Sunday and celebrate his resurrection. And part of that was, yes, receiving the body, blood, soul, and divinity of our Lord Jesus Christ in the form of the Holy Eucharist. We've talked about it many times. We have an episode here on the real presence, a case for the real presence. We talk about it on why, unfortunately, many Catholics don't even believe in the real presence anymore. We've talked about on the episode that we did on Ignatius of Antioch, where we quote his words, where we talked about how the early church believed in truly in the real presence. We have an episode on St. Irenaeus talking about, the early church fathers all document this. And so it was the same thing. In the Old Testament, it was a top-down approach. In the New Testament, again, the church leadership, the apostolic fathers and their successors, no matter where the church spread. We always talk about kind of the West because we're from the West, and think about St. Paul. But remember, St. Thomas went to India. St. Matthew went down to Egypt. A lot of the other saints went to Asia Minor and so forth. But wherever that the church spread, always in the local communities, it was the same thing. There were some sort of readings in the beginning, and then there was the celebration of the Holy Eucharist, of the what we call today the Mass. Remember, the word Mass comes from the Latin for missa, which means to send out. It's just one of the words that's said in what we call the Latin Mass, extraordinary form of the Mass. But take away the word Mass, because the word Mass is confusing to Protestants. It's just our service, it's our liturgy. But the early church always had this liturgy. Now, there have been some growths in it, but you can go to the early church fathers. What they would do is they would get together at least on Sundays, if not on other days. And you remember, we've talked about it on kind of the refusal and rebuttal of the Seventh-day Adventists, how Sunday was not a transference of the Sabbath. It's not the transference of that. We're not going to spend too much time on that here, because remember, a lot of the early Christians were slaves. They had to work. They had to work on Sundays. It wasn't really their choice. But no matter where the church spread, there was an understanding of this proto-liturgy. And that liturgy, though it's changed slightly, has essentially been the same for 2,000 years. Now, some of course, you far right will say with the Novus Ordo Mass, it's radically changed. But for 2,000 years, it's the same Mass. Now, we juxtapose that with kind of a lot of the evangelical non-denominational churches, and it's just so different, right? You can go in with your latte, you can listen to pop music. There's going to be some sort of sermon, maybe some readings, but lots of times it's just loud rock music and sermons to make you leave feeling good about yourself. Now, on one level, again, they have some of the truth They don't have the fullness of the faith. The fullness of the faith only resides in the Catholic faith. But it's not like necessarily praising God is bad. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is like there's this kind of like watered down preaching. There's this watered down service where it's okay to go in and drink and eat during the service, and there's much, and again, this is the, if you go to like the high church Anglicans and the Lutherans, you're not going to see it as much, but you go to like a traditional Latin Mass or even a well done Novus Ordo Mass, there is some sort of solemnity, and then you juxtapose that with a lot of the non-denominationals. I mean, I have one in the city that I lived in near that has a carousel in the front, literally a carousel to attract the kids. But my point is this: they created a service that they feel would be efficacious in bringing people in. Now, whether or not it's to bring people in because they truly want them to come back to God, or is it because, it's a good business model if we have a carousel on the front because you get the kids, you get the parents, and so forth. Who knows? I'm not here to judge those people. But when the service is bottom up, that's when you lead to a lot of just distortions and liturgical abuses or preaching abuses or whatever you want to call them, because there is not a top-down approach. And this again goes back to the beauty of the magisterium. This goes back to the beauty of a hierarchical church that establishes everything. It cannot make an error in faith and morals. It's protected by the Holy Spirit, because that's what Christ said to Peter and gave Peter the keys of the kingdom. And so there's no misunderstanding, there's no over concoctions of the service. This is it. We have the book. It's called the General Instruction of the Roman Missal. This is how we do our masses. This is the way it's supposed to be. Do it like this. And you're going to see less abuses. Yes, I mean, I have the series here on liturgical abuses, but as a whole, no matter where you are in the world, the Mass, and I would say as a whole, the Orthodox Masses as well, are done a certain way. Whereas if you go to a Protestant church, the thousands of denominations, you're going to get a whole spectrum of things. Some of them are going to be good, don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with hearing somebody preach about God. The problem is like with the pastor or the preacher. I mean, how do you know what they're saying comes with authority? How do you know they're interpreting Scripture the right way? And this goes back to the beauty of the magisterium. And this goes back to the anarchy that you find inherently in denominationalism, because you will have these men like Joseph Smith, for example, or whoever who will exegete the Bible their own way and then create their own church and then preach. And lots of times they're preaching wrong. Like any church that preaches on the rapture as being scriptural, they're not preaching the truth, but the people that go in there think it's the truth, right? And this goes back to what Paul and Peter talk about in the New Testament about watch out for false prophets and false teachers. That's most of the epistles. That's a running theme that's going through them. So it's just, again, it makes sense to have a hierarchical approach that has unbroken apostolic succession. And with that, along with securing apostolic, or the deposit of faith, I should say, with that, it secures and continues this liturgy that we've had since the very early church. I have an episode here. What would an evangelical find if he was time traveled back to 325 AD? He would not find anything that resembles his church. He would find it anywhere he went in 325 AD. First of all Christians were Catholics at that time, but he would find the Mass. The Mass was celebrated everywhere. There was no form of the Protestant service at that time being celebrated on a Sunday. Just didn't happen. So in closing, guys, top-down approach makes sense. Magisterium, again, makes sense. Sacred tradition makes sense. From which the Bible comes, all these things make sense. Christ founded a visible church. It was not this invisible collection of Christians that are scattered that have contradictory theology. That's not what was intended. We pray for our separated brethren. We pray that they may come out to Holy Mother Church. We pray for church unity. Guys, post in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Please hit the notification button, subscribe button, and share button. Until next time, take care. God bless and pray.